Let me tell you a story. It happened a long time ago, out in the American West, when the land was still wild and a man's word meant something. Back then, loneliness could settle into a soul the way dust settles into old floorboards, quiet, slow, and hard to shake loose once it takes hold. This is a story about two people who had nothing in common except that neither one of them had anywhere else to go. It is about how fate brought them together on a muddy mountain road one autumn afternoon, and how that single moment changed everything that came after. I share this with you not because it is grand or extraordinary, but because it is true to life. Sometimes the best things come to us uninvited, like a stray dog that shows up at your door and never leaves. Love does not always arrive with bells and whistles. Sometimes it comes quiet, through small kindnesses, through shared silence, through simply being there when no one else would. If you have ever felt alone or passed over or wondered if second chances still exist in this world, this story is for you. The rain had stopped 2 hours ago, but the mountain road still ran thick with mud. Caleb Stone pulled on the reins, slowing Dusty to a careful walk. The old horse snorted, ears flicking forward. Something ahead. Caleb had learned long ago to trust that instinct. Dusty had been reading trouble longer than most men had been alive. He heard it before he saw it. Voices. Men's voices. Rough and slurred, carrying through the thin autumn air. The smell of wet pine and horse sweat mixed with something sharper, whiskey. Maybe carried on the wind. Then a woman's voice. Sharp. Defiant. Caleb pulled Dusty to a stop. His hand moved to his hip, rested on the grip of his revolver, then dropped away. He had not drawn that weapon in 4 years. He did not intend to start now. The road curved around a massive boulder, and when he came around it, he saw them. 3 men, 2 standing, 1 crouching by an overturned wagon. The wheel had snapped clean off. Spokes scattered in the mud like broken bones. Supplies lay everywhere, bags of herbs, woven blankets, a small wooden box with carved letters on its lid. And the woman, she stood with her back against the hillside, a knife in her hand, no longer than a man's finger. Her clothes were travel-worn, her hair dark and loose around her shoulders. She was not screaming. She was not crying. She was watching the men the way a hawk watches a snake patient, calculating, waiting. Caleb recognized the men. Billy Miller, the youngest, Tom Grady's boy, and a hired hand from the Dawson Ranch whose name he could never remember. Billy was grinning, that mean little grin he had gotten from his grandfather. "Come on now," he was saying. "Just hand over whatever you got, and we'll let you go on your way. Ain't that fair?" The woman said nothing. Her grip on the knife did not waver. Caleb dismounted. His boots sank into the mud with a thick sucking sound. All 3 men turned. "Caleb," Billy said, surprise flickering across his face before he covered it with bravado. "Ain't seen you in town in a while." Caleb did not answer. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood between the men and the woman. He could feel her eyes on his back, not grateful, not relieved, just watching, assessing. "Go home, Billy," Caleb said. His voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. "Now hold on. Your mother know where you are right now." Caleb looked at each of them in turn. "Tom, your daddy's still deacon at the church. How about you explain to him what you're doing on this road, middle of the day, bothering a woman traveling alone?" The silence stretched. Billy's grin faded. He glanced at the others, found no support, and spat into the mud. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway," he muttered. Turning away. "Let's go." They mounted their horses and rode off without looking back, their threats hanging unfinished in the damp air. Caleb waited until the hoofbeats faded. Then he turned. The woman had not moved. The knife was still in her hand. Her eyes dark, deep, unreadable, met his without flinching. She did not say thank you. He did not expect her to. There is an old saying folks used to share, "A stranger is just a friend you have not met yet." If this story has found you today, I would be glad to know where you are reading from. Drop a word in the comments and let us know you are here. Caleb walked past her to the overturned wagon. The axle had cracked, not just the wheel. Wood splintered white against the dark mud. No fixing that on the road. He crouched, ran his hand along the brake. Fresh. The wagon had hit something, a rock. Maybe. Hidden under the mud from last night's rain. Bad luck. The kind that found people when they could least afford it. Behind him, he heard her move. The soft scrape of her boots on wet stone. She was gathering her things, the scattered bags, the blankets, the wooden box. He did not turn to watch. Her horse stood a few yards away, still hitched to the broken wagon, shifting nervously. A decent mare, gray with white stockings. Well cared for, whoever this woman was. She knew horses. Caleb straightened. "Wagon's done," he said, not looking at her. Axles split clean through. No answer. He walked to the mare, ran his hand along her neck to calm her. The leather of the harness was worn but oiled. The stitching held. He began unbuckling the straps, freeing the horse from the wreckage. "I can do that," her voice, close behind him. He had not heard her approach. Caleb stepped aside. She moved in, fingers working the buckles with practiced ease. No hesitation, no fumbling. She had done this 1,000 times. He took the moment to look, really look at what she had been carrying. The bags were parfleche, painted with faded red and black designs. Lakota. Maybe. The blankets were Navajo weave, tight and clean. And the box was pale pine, the kind a carpenter would use. Letters carved into the lid. Rough but careful. "Morning Star for my daughter, J. Whitmore." A white man's name, a father's handwriting. She caught him looking. Her hands stilled on the harness. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet sage and coming rain, somewhere down the valley. A crow called out, harsh and lonely. Then she pulled the last strap free and led the mare away from the broken wagon. Her back was straight. Her jaw was set. She did not explain. She did not owe him an explanation. Caleb looked at the road ahead. 8 miles to town. She could ride the mare, carry what she could, leave the rest. But then what? Where would she go? Who in that town would open a door for a woman like her, alone, with no kin, no husband, no name anyone would recognize? He knew the answer before he finished the question. No one. The town of Copper Creek sat at the base of the valley, a single main street flanked by wooden buildings that had seen better years. Caleb rode in with the woman on her gray mare beside him. People stopped on the boardwalk. A woman pulled her child closer. A man in a blacksmith's apron set down his hammer and stared. Caleb kept his eyes forward. The boarding house stood at the end of the street, 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a sign that read, "Rooms," in faded black letters. Caleb dismounted, tied Dusty to the post, and walked up the creaking steps. Mrs. Harmon opened the door before he knocked. Her eyes went past him, found the woman still mounted on her horse, and something shifted in her face, a door closing behind her expression. "No rooms," she said. "Sign says no rooms." The door shut. The lock clicked. Caleb stood on the porch, his hand still raised to knock. The wood smelled of old paint and dust. Behind him, The woman said nothing. The church was 3 buildings down, white clapboard, a simple steeple, a wooden cross above the door. Reverend Tate was sweeping the front steps when Caleb approached. The broom made a dry, rasping sound against the boards. "Reverend." "Caleb." The old man's eyes moved to the woman, then back. His sweeping slowed. "What can I do for you?" "She needs a place to stay. Just for the night. Her wagon broke down on the mountain road." Reverend Tate set the broom against the railing. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on, the whole time. He did not look at the woman. "I wish I could help," he said. His voice was gentle, the way a man's voice gets when he is about to say no. "But we do not have the facilities for this kind of situation." "What kind of situation is that?" "Reverend." The old man's jaw tightened. He picked up his broom. "I will pray for her safe travels." He went inside. The door closed softly, but it closed. Caleb walked back to the horses. The woman had dismounted now. She sat on the steps of the closed general store, her hands wrapped around that small wooden box, her eyes fixed on the ground. She was not begging. She was not crying. She was just waiting. "Caleb!" Sheriff Burrell stood in the doorway of his office across the street. A big man, gray-bearded, with a star pinned to a vest that had grown too tight years ago. He jerked his head. "Come here." Caleb crossed the street. The sheriff pulled him inside, out of sight of the road. The office smelled of tobacco and old coffee and leather that needed oiling. "You know what you're doing, son. Trying to find her a place to sleep." Burrell laughed, but there was no humor in it. "In this town for her." He shook his head. "You saved her up on that road. Word's already spread. Billy Miller's been running his mouth at the saloon. So you took responsibility for her the moment you stepped between her and those boys. That's how it works out here, you know that." Caleb's hands curled at his sides. "I don't need a wife. And she don't need a husband." Burrell leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "But she needs a roof tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that. You leave her here alone. The Millers will come back, or someone worse. And next time, you won't be there. That's not my... Ain't asking you to love her, son." Burrell's voice dropped. "Just asking you to keep her alive. You ride home alone tonight, and come morning, someone finds her in a ditch somewhere. You want that following you around the rest of your days." Caleb said nothing. Through the dirty window, he could see her still sitting on those steps, holding that box like it was the only thing she had left in the world. Maybe it was. He walked out of the sheriff's office, crossed the street, stopped in front of her. She looked up. Her eyes met his, dark, steady, asking nothing. He opened his mouth to speak, and realized he did not know what to say. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours. Neither of them spoke. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, on the way the late afternoon light fell gold through the cottonwoods, on anything but the woman riding beside him. Her mare's hooves made soft sounds in the dirt. Her breathing was steady, controlled, like she had learned long ago not to let anyone hear what she was feeling. The house appeared as they crested the last hill. A single-story structure of weathered pine. A porch that needed new boards. A barn that leaned slightly to the east. No smoke from the chimney. The windows dark. The place looked abandoned. It had looked abandoned for years. Caleb dismounted by the porch. He stood there, hand on the worn railing, not moving. She waited on her horse. "Inside," he said finally. He did not look at her. "Bedroom's through the back. You sleep there." He heard her dismount, heard her boots on the porch steps, heard the door creak open and then silence as she stepped inside. Caleb led the horses to the barn. He took his time with the saddles, the bridles, the feed. Dusty nuzzled his shoulder, looking for the apple that sometimes came after a long ride. Not tonight. Caleb filled the water trough and stood listening to the horses drink, the sound loud in the quiet evening. When he could not delay any longer, he walked back to the house. She had found the bedroom. The door was closed. Through the thin wall, he heard nothing. No movement, no sound. He pulled a blanket from the chest by the cold fireplace wool. Rough, the color of old mud, and lay down on the leather couch. The springs groaned under his weight. A mouse skittered somewhere in the walls. The wind pushed through the gaps around the door, cold fingers searching the room. He stared at the ceiling. The boards were dark with age, cracked in places where the rain had leaked through before he patched the roof. Sleep did not come. He heard her turn over once. The bed frame creaked. The floorboards in the bedroom groaned under shifting weight. Then silence again. The house had not held two people in 7 years. He had forgotten how loud another person's presence could be, even when they made no sound at all. Every breath she took seemed to move through the walls. Every time she shifted, the whole house knew. Caleb lay awake, listening to a stranger sleep in his mother's bed, and wondered what he had done. Gray light filled the room when he opened his eyes. Something was wrong, different. He lay still, one hand on his chest, the wool blanket scratchy against his chin. Then he smelled it. Food. Cooking. Something with herbs he did not recognize. Something earthy and green and warm. The iron stove was crackling. Heat spread through the front room for the first time in months. Caleb sat up. His back ached from the couch. He rubbed his face, felt the stubble rough against his palms, and walked toward the kitchen. She stood at the stove, her back to him. She had found the pot he never used, the one with the copper bottom his mother had brought from Missouri. Steam rose from it, carrying that strange green smell. On the table, 2 bowls sat waiting, 2 spoons, 2 cups for coffee. She turned when she heard him. "What's that?" His voice came out rough. He had not spoken to anyone in his own house in so long that the words felt strange. Food. He walked closer. The smell was stronger now, corn. Yes, but something else beneath it, sharp and alive. Smells different. She stirred the pot, her wooden spoon scraping the bottom. Good different or bad different? He did not answer right away. He watched her ladle the porridge into the bowls, her movements precise, economical. No wasted motion. She had cooked over fires like this her whole life. "Just different," he said. She set the pot down and picked up one of the bowls, held it out to him. He reached for it. Their fingers touched just for a moment, the edge of her hand brushing his palm, and she pulled back, fast, like she had touched a hot stove. Caleb took the bowl, sat down at the table. He did not look at her. She sat across from him. The chair scraped against the floor. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the spoons against the clay bowls, the fire popping in the stove, the wind moving through the gaps in the window frame. When he finished, Caleb stood. He carried his bowl to the tin basin by the wall and set it down. Then he stopped. His hands hung at his sides. He did not know what to do with them. Someone else would wash that bowl now. Someone else was in his kitchen. Someone else would be here when he came back tonight. "Grace." He turned. She was looking at him, her bowl still in her hands, steam rising between them. "My name," she said. "People call me Grace." She said it flat. Not an introduction. A fact. Like she was reminding herself as much as telling him. Caleb nodded once. He grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "I'll be in the north pasture." He left before she could answer. The door shut behind him. The morning air hit his face, cold and sharp, and he stood on the porch breathing it in. From inside, he heard her begin to wash the bowls. He walked to the barn faster than he needed to. The fence along the north pasture had been falling apart for 2 years. Caleb had patched it when he could, but the posts were rotting and the wires sagged in places where the cattle pushed through. He needed to fix it properly. He had been telling himself that for months. He carried the tools out after breakfast: hammer, nails, a saw, new posts he had cut last spring and never used. The morning was cool, the sky the color of bleached cotton. He set to work pulling out the old posts, the wood crumbling in his hands like dried bread. He did not hear her approach. When he looked up, she was standing 3 feet away, watching. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows. "I can help," she said. He almost told her no, almost told her to go back to the house. But she was already reaching for the hammer, and something in the way she held it easy, familiar. The weight balanced in her palm made him stop. "You done this before?" "My father was a carpenter." He pulled another post from the ground. The dirt came away in clumps, still damp from the rain 3 days past. "Thought you were..." "Half?" She knelt beside him, held the new post steady while he positioned it in the hole. "My mother was Lakota. My father was a white man who stayed..." The words hung in the air. Caleb drove the post into the ground with 3 hard swings. The impact traveled up his arms, into his shoulders, rattling his teeth. "He teach you good," he said. He did. They worked through the morning without speaking. She held the boards. He nailed them. When the wire needed stretching, she pulled while he hammered the staples. Her hands were strong. Her grip did not slip. Sweat darkened the back of her dress. Dust settled on her forearms. She did not complain. By noon, they had finished half the fence line. Caleb wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve and looked at what they had done. Straight posts, tight wire. Work that would last. He did not say anything. He just nodded. She nodded back. In the afternoon, he found her in the barn, standing beside Dusty's stall. The old horse had his head over the gate, and she was stroking his nose, murmuring something Caleb could not hear. The barn smelled of hay and horse and old leather. "He don't usually like strangers," Caleb said from the doorway. She did not turn around. "Maybe he knows I am not a stranger anymore." Dusty snorted and pushed his head against her shoulder. She laughed, a small sound. Barely there, but Caleb heard it. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. "You ride?" he asked. "Some..." "Not like this." She gestured at the western saddle hanging on the wall. "Different where I come from." He took the saddle down. The leather creaked as he settled it on Dusty's back, tightened the cinch, adjusted the stirrups. He led the horse out into the yard and held the reins out to her. She mounted easily, but her hands on the reins were uncertain, too high, too tight. Caleb stepped closer. "Here." He reached up, placed his hands over hers, moved them lower on the reins. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, rough from work. He could feel the small bones of her fingers, the calluses on her palms. "Loose," he said. "Let him feel you, not fight you." She adjusted her grip. Her fingers brushed against his as he pulled away. Neither of them mentioned it. That evening, Caleb sat in the front room, pretending to read the almanac he had already read twice. The lamp cast a circle of yellow light. Beyond it, the room fell into shadow. Grace sat by the window, a pile of fabric in her lap. She had found the sewing basket, his mother's, untouched for years, and a collection of old cloth from the chest in the bedroom. Torn shirts, faded curtains, a dress with small flowers on cream-colored cotton, left behind by someone whose name he could no longer remember. Her needle moved in and out of the fabric. Quick, precise. She was piecing the scraps together, matching colors, creating patterns from things that had been thrown away. A quilt. She was making a quilt. Caleb lowered the book. From the barn, Dusty shifted in his stall. From somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote called, high and lonesome. The fire crackled in the stove. The wind moved through the grass outside, a sound like slow breathing. The house did not feel empty anymore. The next morning, Caleb woke to the smell of coffee. He lay still for a moment, confused. He had not made coffee. He had not lit the stove. Then he remembered. He walked to the kitchen. She was not there. The pot sat on the stove, still warm. His cup was already poured, steam rising from it. He heard something from outside. Faint, coming from the barn. He took his coffee and walked to the door. Pushed it open. Grace stood by the cow pen, a bucket beneath the old milk cow, her hands working steadily. And she was singing. Low, almost a hum, rising and falling like wind through tall grass. The words were not English, not any language he knew. But the melody was old, sad, beautiful in a way that made his chest tight. Caleb stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He just listened. The coffee growing cold in his hand, while the sun came up over the ridge and turned the whole world gold. When she finished, she looked up. Their eyes met across the yard, and for the first time in years, Caleb was not sure he wanted to be alone anymore. Sunday came, whether Caleb wanted it to or not. He had not been to church in 3 years, had not seen the point, but Grace had found the worn Bible in the bedroom, his mother's. The spine cracked, the pages soft from handling, and he had seen her reading it by lamplight. She had not asked him to take her to service. She did not need to. They rode into town together. The morning was bright, the air sharp with the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves. The road was dry, the dust rising behind them in small clouds. The general store was open. Caleb needed flour, sugar, coffee. Simple things. He tied Dusty to the post and helped Grace down from her mare. Her hand was warm in his. She let go quickly. Harold Benson stood behind the counter, a pencil tucked behind his ear, his apron stained with something dark. He looked up when the bell above the door rang. His eyes went to Caleb, then to Grace, then back to Caleb. "Morning, Caleb." His voice was careful, flat. "Harold." "She can wait outside." Harold's gaze stayed on Caleb's face. "Ain't proper. Her being in here. You understand?" Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. His hands curled at his sides. "She's my wife." "I heard." Harold picked up his pencil, set it down again. "Still, you want my money or not?" "Harold." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the back, behind the curtain, someone coughed. Mrs. Benson, probably. Listening. Harold's jaw worked. He looked at the counter, at the cans of beans stacked behind him, at anything but Grace. "What you need." Caleb listed the items. Harold gathered them slowly, weighing each bag twice, counting the change 3 times. When he pushed the goods across the counter, he did not look at Grace once. She carried her share without a word. The church bell was ringing when they arrived. Caleb tied the horses and walked with Grace up the wooden steps. The door was open. Inside, the pews were filling with families in their Sunday clothes. Men in dark coats, women in bonnets, fanning themselves with folded paper. Children squirming between their parents. The air smelled of candle wax, old hymnals, and the faint sweetness of mothballs from clothes worn only once a week. Reverend Tate stood at the pulpit, Bible open in his hands. He was mid-sentence when Caleb and Grace stepped through the doorway. He stopped. The congregation turned, heads swiveled, paper fans stilled. Eyes found Grace and stayed there. No one moved. Caleb walked down the center aisle. Grace walked beside him. He could feel the weight of every stare, pressing against him like hands trying to push him back. There were no empty seats. Every pew was full or looked full. People shifted closer together. Women pulled their skirts in. Men angled their shoulders, closing gaps that had been open moments before. Caleb stopped at the back row. A man he did not recognize sat at the end. His wife beside him, their children between them. There was room. There was clearly room. The man did not look up. His wife studied her hymnal like it held the answers to every question ever asked. Caleb stood there. Grace stood beside him. Reverend Tate cleared his throat and continued his sermon. His voice echoed off the wooden walls. But the words meant nothing. They stood for the entire service. The wooden floor creaked beneath their feet. Caleb's legs ached. His back ached. He did not move. Beside him, Grace was still. Her hands were folded in front of her, her fingers laced together. He glanced down and saw her knuckles white, bloodless. The skin stretched tight over bone. She was gripping her own hands hard enough to bruise. But her face showed nothing. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on the cross above the pulpit. When the final hymn ended, the congregation dispersed quickly. No one approached them. No one said goodbye. Outside, Caleb untied the horses. His hands shook. He did not know if it was anger or something else. "Wait!" A voice from behind, old and thin. Caleb turned. A small figure hurried down the church steps, skirts gathered in one hand, a cloth bundle in the other. Eleanor Marsh, 80 years old, lived alone at the edge of town, had buried 2 husbands and 3 children and was still standing. She stopped in front of Grace, breathing hard, her cheeks pink. "Here." She pressed the bundle into Grace's hands. "Gingerbread, my grandmother's recipe." Grace looked at the bundle, then at the old woman. "Don't mind them none, dear," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Small minds in a small town. That's all it is." She reached up, patted Grace's cheek with a papery hand, and turned away. Caleb helped Grace onto her horse. She held the gingerbread in her lap like something precious. They rode in silence for a mile. 2. The town disappeared behind the hills. Then Grace spoke. "It's all right. I am used to it." Caleb did not answer. His hands tightened on the reins. He rode beside her the rest of the way home, not ahead, not behind, beside her, so close their stirrups almost touched. That night, after supper, he found the gingerbread on the table, still wrapped. She had not eaten any. She was saving it. For what? He did not know. The crash came at midnight. Caleb was on his feet before the echo faded, his hand reaching for the rifle above the door. Glass scattered across the floor, catching the moonlight, sharp and bright as scattered teeth. Wind poured through the broken window. Cold, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. Grace stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her hair loose, her feet bare. She did not scream. She did not move. She looked at the hole in the window, at the rock on the floor, at the piece of paper tied around it with twine. Caleb picked up the rock. His hands were steady. The paper was rough, torn from a feed sack. The words were written in pencil, pressed so hard the paper had torn in places. "Send her back where she belongs." He read it twice. His jaw ached. He was clenching his teeth hard enough to crack them. Grace crossed the room. Her bare feet moved through the broken glass without hesitation. A piece sliced into her heel. She did not stop. She took the paper from his hand, read it, and set it on the table. Her face did not change. She walked back to the bedroom. Caleb heard the creak of the floorboards, the scrape of something being dragged across wood. When he reached the doorway, she was kneeling on the floor, folding her clothes into the canvas bag she had brought from the wagon. Blood pooled beneath her foot, dark against the wooden boards. She did not seem to notice. "What are you doing?" She did not look up. Her hands moved fold, press, place, fold, press, place, mechanical, empty. "Grace, I should go." Her voice was flat, dead. "Before it gets worse." "Where?" "I do not know." She reached for her shawl, the one with the red and black pattern, and pressed it into the bag. "Somewhere. Somewhere ain't a place. Grace." She stopped, her hands stilled on the fabric. Blood was spreading across the floor now, a dark stain that reached toward her knees. She was kneeling in it. Kneeling in her own blood on his floor, packing her things to leave in the middle of the night because someone threw a rock through his window. "You don't need this trouble." Her voice cracked, just barely. "You didn't ask for any of this. You were just trying to help. And now," she gestured at the broken window, at the rock, at the paper on the table. "Now they're coming for you too." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. The wood was rough against his shoulder. Cold air moved through the house, made the lamp flame shiver and dance. "Maybe I need something else," he said. She looked up then. Her eyes were dry, dark, waiting. "What?" He did not answer right away. He looked at the bag in her hands, at the blood on the floor, at the half-finished quilt on the bed scraps of his old shirts, his mother's curtains, pieces of this house stitched together by her hands. Then he looked past her, into the front room, at the rocking chair by the window. "That chair," he said. His voice came out rough. "You been sitting in it every night." She said nothing. "My mother sat in that chair every night after supper. She'd sit there and sew." He swallowed. His throat was tight. "When she died, I didn't want anyone else there, so I left it empty." The wind pushed through the broken window. The lamp flame guttered, somewhere outside. A coyote called. "7 years?" The words came slow, dragged up from somewhere deep. That chair just sat there, empty. I walked past it every single day. Couldn't bring myself to look at it. Couldn't bring myself to move it, neither. Grace's hands loosened on the bag. Her fingers uncurled, one by one. "Then you came." He pushed off the doorframe, took a step into the room, "and you sat there like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I watched you, and I thought, He stopped. The words stuck in his throat like dry bread. Thought what? Her voice was barely a whisper. I thought maybe it was time someone sat there again. The bag slipped from her hands. It fell to the floor, spilling clothes across the blood-stained wood. Grace stood. She was shaking. Not crying. Not breaking. Just shaking. Her whole body trembling like a leaf that would not fall. She took a step toward him. Stopped. Took another. I don't want to bring you trouble, she said. Too late for that. She almost smiled. Almost. Caleb looked at her standing there in the moonlight barefoot, bleeding, surrounded by broken glass and scattered clothes and everything she owned in the world. He looked at the paper on the table, at the rock on the floor, at the hole in the window where the cold was pouring in. We'll fix the window tomorrow, he said. Get some sleep. He turned to leave. Caleb. He stopped at the door. The chair, she said. I didn't know it was hers. I know. He walked out. Behind him, he heard her sit down on the bed, heard the springs creak, heard nothing else. In the front room, the rocking chair sat silver in the moonlight. He lowered himself into it. The wood was cold against his back. The armrests fit his hands like they had been waiting for him. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, gray dawn light was creeping through the broken window, and Grace was standing in the doorway, watching him. They rode into town the next morning. Caleb had boarded up the window before dawn, hammering planks across the hole while the sky turned from black to gray. Grace had watched from the porch, her bandaged foot resting on the rail, saying nothing. When he finished, she was already dressed, her hair braided, the small wooden box tucked under her arm. He did not ask where she wanted to go. He already knew. The main street of Copper Creek was quiet, too quiet. A few people stood on porches, watching. A dog barked somewhere behind the livery stable. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke and horse manure and dust. Caleb dismounted in front of the general store. He walked around to Grace's horse and held up his hand. She looked at it, then at him. He did not move. She took his hand. Her fingers were cold. He helped her down and did not let go. They walked toward the store, together, his hand holding hers. In full view of everyone on that street, he heard someone gasp, heard a door slam, heard boots on wood as someone hurried inside. He did not turn around. The group was waiting outside the general store. 4 men. Billy Miller stood at the front, his thumbs hooked in his belt, that mean grin spreading across his face. Behind him, his brother Tom, the Dawson ranch hand, and Old Man Miller himself, standing apart, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Well. Billy stepped forward, blocking the doorway. Look who's here, the squaw man and his Billy. Old Man Miller's voice cut through the air, sharp, hard. Billy glanced back. Pa, I know what you're doing. Miller did not move from his spot. His eyes were fixed on his son, not on Caleb, not on Grace. I've been watching what you've been doing. The rock through the window. That note. You think I don't know? The grin faded from Billy's face. His hands dropped from his belt, hung at his sides. That wasn't... Don't lie to me, boy. Miller's voice dropped low. Caleb could barely hear him. I taught you better than that. Your mother taught you better than that. Billy's face went red. The color spread down his neck, crawled up past his ears. He looked at his father, then at the ground. She's just a She's a woman. Miller uncrossed his arms. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood beside his son. She's a woman who ain't done nothing to you. Ain't done nothing to anyone in this town. And you've been treating her like she ain't even worth the dirt on your boots. Billy opened his mouth, closed it. The red in his face deepened. Miller turned to Caleb. His eyes were tired, old. The eyes of a man who had lived too long and seen too much and regretted more than he could ever say. I apologize for my son. The words came out stiff, like they hurt to speak. He forgot who he was raised to be. Caleb said nothing. His hand was still holding Grace's. He could feel her pulse through her fingers, quick and light. Go on inside. Miller stepped aside, pulling Billy with him. Get what you need. Caleb walked past them. Grace walked beside him. The door opened. The bell rang. Harold stood behind the counter, his face pale, his hands flat on the wood. He did not speak. 10 pounds of flour, Caleb said. 5 of sugar. And whatever she wants. Harold's eyes moved to Grace. She was looking at the shelves, at the bolts of fabric stacked along the wall, at the jars of penny candy by the window. A spool of red thread caught the light. She. Harold's voice cracked. My wife. Caleb's hand tightened on Grace's. Her name is Grace. Use it. Harold swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed. He reached under the counter and pulled out a paper sack. Outside, Caleb heard voices. Arguing. Billy's voice, high and defensive. Miller's voice, low and steady. A father telling his son the truth. A truth neither of them wanted to hear. Grace moved along the shelves. She picked up the spool of red thread and turned it over in her hands. She looked at Harold. How much? Harold stared at her. At the thread. At Caleb. 2 cents, he said finally. She set it on the counter. They loaded the supplies onto the horses in silence. The street was empty now. Porches cleared, doors closed. But as they mounted up, Caleb saw movement at the corner. Eleanor Marsh stood on her porch, a shawl wrapped around her thin shoulders, her white hair loose in the wind. She raised her hand, not waving, just lifting it, palm out. Grace saw her. She raised her hand in return. Eleanor nodded once. Then she turned and went inside. They rode out of town. No one followed. No one called after them. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet. The sun was climbing, burning off the morning mist, turning the hills gold and amber. Grace rode beside him. Not behind. Beside. That wasn't a victory, she said quietly. No. Caleb looked at the road, at the sky, at her. But it was a start. She did not answer, but her hand moved across the space between them, found his on the saddle horn, and rested there. He did not pull away. But they rode like that for a long time, their horses walking side by side, their hands touching in the space between. And for the first time in years, Caleb found himself thinking about tomorrow. The quilt was finished. Grace had spread it across the rocking chair that morning, smoothing the fabric with her hands, pressing out the wrinkles. Caleb had watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee cooling in his grip. The colors caught the light through the new window glass, red and brown and cream. Pieces of old shirts and faded curtains and a dress with flowers that had belonged to someone he could no longer remember. She had made something whole from things that had been thrown away. He had not said anything. He had finished his coffee and gone to the barn. Now the sun was setting. Caleb walked back from the pasture, his boots heavy with mud, his shoulders aching from the day's work. The fence was done, all of it, every post straight, every wire tight, work that would last through winter and beyond. He stopped at the edge of the yard. The house looked different in the evening light. The boards were still weathered, the porch still needed new planks, the chimney still leaned slightly to the south. But something had changed. There was light in the window, a soft yellow glow, steady and warm, spilling out across the porch and into the yard. The oil lamp. Grace had cleaned the glass that morning, trimmed the wick, filled the reservoir with oil. He had watched her do it and had not understood why. Now he understood. She had lit it for him, so he could see his way home. Caleb stood there, mud on his boots, sweat drying cold on his back, and looked at that light. He could not remember the last time someone had left a lamp burning for him. Could not remember the last time anyone had waited. The door was closed. Through the window. He could see her moving in the kitchen. Her hair was loose, falling past her shoulders. She was stirring something on the stove, her movements slow and easy. She did not know he was watching, or maybe she did. He walked to the porch, climbed the steps, put his hand on the door. He did not open it. Instead, he stood there, his palm flat against the wood, feeling the faint warmth from inside. He could hear the fire crackling, could smell bread baking, yeasty and rich, could hear Grace humming something low and soft, a melody without words. His mother had hummed like that. In the evenings, when the work was done and the house was quiet, she would sit in her rocking chair and sew, and she would hum, and he would fall asleep to the sound of it. That was a lifetime ago. He pushed open the door. Grace looked up, the spoon stilled in her hand. The lamplight caught her face, her eyes, the small lines at the corners of her mouth. "Supper's almost ready," she said. "I know." He took off his boots by the door, hung his hat on the hook, washed his hands in the basin, watching the dirt swirl away in the water. They ate at the table. 2 chairs, 2 plates, 2 cups of coffee. The bread was warm. The stew was thick with vegetables from the garden Eleanor had helped them plant. Grace talked about spring, about the herbs she wanted to grow, sage and thyme, and something with a Lakota name he could not pronounce. About the mare, who was getting fat and lazy. About ordering more glass for the bedroom window. Caleb listened. He watched her hands move as she spoke, watched the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, watched the lamplight play across her face. When the meal was done, he carried the dishes to the basin, stood there looking out the window at the dark pasture, at the hills black against the sky, at the moon rising pale over the ridge. "Reckon I'll need to build another chair," he said. Grace set down her cup. "What for?" "Just in case." In case what? He did not turn around. He watched the moon climb higher. In case someone needs it someday. The silence stretched. The fire popped in the stove, outside. Dusty nickered softly in the barn. Then he heard her stand, heard her footsteps cross the floor, felt her hand settle on his shoulder light. Careful. The first time she had touched him like that. "Then you better start cutting wood," she said. Caleb put his hand over hers. The lamp burned in the window. The quilt lay across the rocking chair. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the fire settling and somewhere far off, a dog barking at the moon. He was home. Some stories leave us quiet. This one may have done that. There is a weight to it, not heavy, exactly, but present. The kind that settles somewhere behind the ribs and stays for a while. A familiar ache. The sort we do not always have words for. Many of us have known what it is to feel unseen, to carry something alone for so long that we forget we are carrying it, to stand in a room full of people and feel like the only one there. Some of us have loved without recognition. Some of us have waited for a door to open that never did. And perhaps some of us have been the one who finally opened it. The story does not need to be resolved. Neither do we. Whatever it stirred in you is allowed to rest there, unfinished, unnamed. It is all right to let it be. Not everything needs an answer. Sometimes it is enough just to feel something familiar and know we are not the only ones who have felt it. Thank you for staying until the end, and thank you for letting this story keep you company, even for a little while.